Hello, dear friends, fellow literature lovers, and cinematic explorers. I'm so glad you've joined me today, because I have something quite special to share. A journey not just through a film, but through story, myth, and the very essence of narrative that has captivated human imagination for centuries. Before we dive in, I'd love it if you lingered here a while, maybe gave a like, perhaps even considered subscribing. Not as a demand, but as a gentle invitation to join this ongoing conversation about stories, art, and the ways they shape us. Now, let's set the stage. Picture a world where gods walk among mortals, where fate is as tangible as the air we breathe, and where courage and heroism are tested not merely by circumstance, but by the very hand of divine will. That is the world this film opens up, a cinematic retelling of myths that have echoed in our collective imagination since time immemorial. From the very first scene, there's a palpable tension between human fragility and divine ambition, and I have to admit, it struck a chord with me. There's something profoundly human about watching heroes confront forces larger than themselves. It reminds me, perhaps nostalgically, of my own attempts to wrestle with challenges that seemed insurmountable. That sense of vulnerability, juxtaposed against awe-inspiring spectacle, is something I find deeply resonant. The film itself is a fascinating exercise in blending the mythic with the modern. It begins in medias res, with the weight of celestial conflict looming over a fragile, war-torn world. There's an immediacy to its opening that reminded me of the classical epics we pore over in literature courses. The Iliad, the Odyssey, where the gods' whims intertwine with mortal destinies. As I watched, I couldn't help but think of the many ways our lives feel similarly dictated by forces outside our control, be they societal pressures, historical tides, or even the capricious nature of chance. In a strangely comforting way, the film reflects a truth we often overlook. That struggle is inevitable, but it is also fertile ground for growth, courage, and self-discovery. The story introduces us to a protagonist whose life is as marked by tragedy as it is by destiny. From the outset, I found myself drawn not just to the spectacle of his adventures, but to the subtleties of his character, the quiet moments of doubt, the flashes of human tenderness beneath a veneer of mythic heroism. There's a tension here between grandeur and intimacy that I think the film handles with unexpected skill. Even amid epic battles and monstrous confrontations, we are invited to linger over the internal landscape of this young man's soul, to consider what it means to navigate a world that is both beautifully crafted and terrifyingly chaotic. I remember sitting back in my own living room, heart thumping, and feeling that curious blend of exhilaration and introspection that only the best mythic tales can provoke. For those who may not be intimately familiar with the storyline, allow me to give you a brief overview without spoiling too much, though I will hint at some of the elements that make this narrative particularly compelling. The plot follows the hero on a quest that is, at once, deeply personal and cosmically significant. It's a journey punctuated by peril, moral quandaries, and encounters with creatures drawn from the very depths of imagination. Each confrontation, whether with man, monster, or the gods themselves, serves as a mirror, reflecting both the hero's inner struggles and the broader human condition. And yet, despite the scale of its narrative ambitions, there's a charm here that I found quietly affecting. A reminder that even in worlds dominated by gods and titans, human agency, our capacity for courage, empathy, and ingenuity remains a central concern. What struck me most as I watched was the film's commitment to atmosphere and texture. From the first glimpse of a storm-lashed coastline to the labyrinthine corridors of fantastical architecture, every frame is a study in visual storytelling. And yet, beyond the dazzling imagery, there's a rhythm to the storytelling that feels almost literary in nature. Scenes unfold with an ebb and flow reminiscent of a carefully structured poem or a sprawling epic, where pauses, silences, and sudden bursts of action work together to create a sense of narrative tension. I found myself marveling at how the filmmakers managed to balance spectacle with reflection, reminding me of the best literary works I've encountered, those that can enthrall and provoke thought simultaneously. And then there's the ensemble of supporting characters, each imbued with a mythic gravitas, yet defined by recognizable human traits. Villains and allies alike are more than mere foils or plot devices. They are extensions of the film's thematic explorations. In many ways, I saw reflections of the archetypes I've studied in literature. The tragic figure, the loyal companion, the morally ambiguous antagonist, but also subtle departures from expectation, moments where the narrative surprised me by subverting my assumptions. Those twists are not merely for shock value. They deepen the story, forcing the audience to question notions of right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, courage and fear. I found myself mentally revisiting my favorite novels, drawing comparisons, and appreciating the ways in which myth and literature converse across centuries and mediums. The film also invites us to consider the nature of destiny and choice. There is a tension here that resonates profoundly with anyone who has pondered the human condition in literary terms. Are our lives the products of predetermined scripts, like the fates woven by ancient deities? Or do we carve meaning from chaos through our decisions, however small or seemingly inconsequential? Watching the protagonist navigate challenges that test his resolve, intellect, and moral compass, I was reminded of characters like Odysseus or Aeneas, whose journeys compel them to confront not only external monsters, but internal contradictions. In a quiet, almost meditative moment, I realized that my own life felt, in a way, mirrored in these trials. The sense that courage is not merely a product of physical strength, but of the persistent, often difficult effort to choose wisely amid uncertainty. I must confess, there were moments when the spectacle of the film truly took my breath away. The battles, the creatures, the visceral energy of myth rendered in living, breathing imagery, all of it resonated with the part of me that cherishes wonder and imagination. Yet, more than the thrills, it was the narrative undercurrent, the exploration of heroism, identity, and the interplay of fate and free will, that lingered with me long after the credits rolled. I caught myself thinking, not about the CGI or the action sequences, but about the way stories shape our understanding of who we are, and how we might aspire to live with courage, even when faced with forces beyond our control. There's also a subtle meditation on the human relationship with the divine, or, perhaps more accurately, the human imagination of the divine. The gods in this story are formidable, often inscrutable, and occasionally capricious, yet they are never purely alien. There's a reflection of human desire, fear, and ambition in their actions, a reminder that myths are ultimately mirrors held up to our own experiences. Watching these interactions unfold, I thought of the great literary traditions where divine figures act as catalysts for human growth or disaster. The plays of Sophocles, the epics of Homer, the allegorical narratives of medieval Europe. In this sense, the film functions as both entertainment and intellectual exercise, challenging viewers to consider timeless questions about morality, power, and our place in the cosmos. And then, of course, there are the key twists. The narrative turns that elevate the story from a simple hero's quest to a meditation on strategy, deception, and revelation. I won't give them away, because their impact is best experienced firsthand, but I will say that each twist is meticulously constructed, often foreshadowed in subtle ways that reward careful attention. There's a literary elegance to this storytelling, a sense that the filmmakers respect the audience's intelligence while still delivering moments of surprise and wonder. For me, these twists were not merely plot points. They were invitations to pause, reflect, and reconsider my assumptions about the story and the characters. It reminded me of the joy of rereading a favorite novel and noticing details previously overlooked, the pleasure of discovery, the thrill of insight. Another element that drew me in was the film's treatment of loyalty, love, and sacrifice. Amidst the chaos of battles and divine machinations, the human connections stand out as grounding forces. Friendships, alliances, and moments of vulnerability give the story emotional weight, reminding us that even in myth, it is relationships that define us. I thought particularly about a scene where the hero confronts not only physical danger, but the moral implications of his choices. It struck me deeply because it echoed the literary explorations I cherish, moments where the protagonist's ethical decisions carry consequences far beyond the immediate context, resonating with universal themes of justice, honor, and integrity. There was a personal resonance too, a reminder of the ways my own friendships and commitments have shaped the trajectory of my life, often in ways I only appreciate in retrospect. And yet, for all its grandeur, the film never loses sight of the human element. There's humor, tenderness, and occasional levity woven into the narrative, creating a balance that keeps the story from feeling overly didactic or oppressive. It reminded me of the novels I return to again and again, works that mix tragedy and comedy, wonder and sorrow, in a way that mirrors the rhythms of real life. Watching these moments unfold, I felt a sense of intimacy, as if the film were not just a spectacle to be consumed, but a companion to be pondered and discussed. I imagined sitting with friends over coffee or wine, debating the choices of characters, the implications of divine interference, and the resonance of myth in contemporary life. Before we move fully into a more analytical discussion, I want to pause and reflect on why this story, in particular, resonates so personally. It's not merely the grandeur or the visual spectacle, though those are undeniable. It's the sense that this story, like the myths of old, speaks to the enduring human struggle for meaning, courage, and understanding. Watching it, I felt connected to centuries of storytellers, from Homer to Shakespeare to modern novelists, each grappling with the interplay of fate and choice, heroism and vulnerability. There's a comfort in that continuity, a sense that our fascination with myth is, at its core, a fascination with ourselves, and with the timeless questions of who we are and what we might aspire to be. So, dear friends, as we prepare to dive deeper into the analysis, consider this. We are not merely observers of spectacle. We are participants in an ongoing conversation about story, character, and the very nature of myth itself. In examining the film through a literary lens, we can explore themes of heroism, identity, morality, and the human imagination in ways that illuminate both the work and ourselves. I invite you to join me in this exploration with curiosity and reflection, allowing the narrative to open doors to thought and conversation rather than simply pass time in idle entertainment. In the next sections, we will explore how the visual and narrative elements interplay, how mythology informs the storytelling, and how the film's themes resonate with literary traditions spanning centuries. We will discuss the symbolism embedded in characters' choices, the ethical dilemmas posed, and the interplay between human agency and divine interference. And we'll do so not as casual viewers, but as students of story, as lovers of literature, and as seekers of meaning within the grand tapestry of myth. So, let us embark on this intellectual journey together, not merely to critique, but to understand, to engage deeply with narrative, to uncover layers of insight, and to revel in the wonder that great stories, whether ancient or modern, can inspire. As the story begins, we are immediately transported to a world that balances between the extraordinary and the deeply human. From the very first frames, there is an unmistakable tension that grips you, an awareness that the universe we are entering is one where the mortal and divine intersect, often with catastrophic consequences. I remember the first time I saw this scene, leaning back in my chair, feeling that thrill of anticipation, tinged with unease. The film doesn't waste time easing you in. It thrusts you into the heart of a mythic conflict, and yet, even amidst all the grandeur, there's a quiet, almost subtle invitation to connect with the characters' inner lives. The opening is set against a backdrop of political and cosmic tension, a world where humans have begun to chafe against the whims of the gods. There's a palpable sense of fragility, of societies teetering on the edge of chaos, and yet, within that tension, small pockets of heroism and resilience shine through. It's in these initial moments that the narrative lays the groundwork for the profound exploration of destiny, choice, and consequence that will unfold. Watching it, I found myself thinking about the ways our own lives often mirror this mythic pattern. Moments of uncertainty, where the smallest decision can ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. The central character, introduced almost immediately, embodies a tension between humility and greatness. He is someone marked by circumstance, born into a world where lineage and divine intervention carry more weight than personal desire. I found his quiet determination compelling from the start. Unlike heroes who seem destined for glory without effort, his path is fraught with doubt and personal struggle. There is a scene early on, one of those small, intimate moments, where he reflects on his place in the world, and I remember feeling a pang of recognition. We all, in some sense, grapple with the pull between what is expected of us and what we long to become. Soon, the narrative introduces us to the broader canvas of the story, a kingdom caught in the grip of tension and fear, where ordinary citizens live under the shadow of divine wrath. It's a setting that is both alien and familiar, one that evokes parallels with historical and literary narratives, where mortals navigate the whims of powers beyond their control. I was struck by how the film captures the texture of this world, the dust and grime of city streets, the tense whispers of citizens who fear not only conquest but moral corruption. Every detail feels deliberate, a reminder that even in mythic tales, realism in small things anchors the story in something recognizably human. As the plot unfolds, the hero is called to action, not immediately through desire, but through necessity. A challenge presents itself, one that demands courage, cunning, and a willingness to confront the unknown. I was particularly drawn to the way these early challenges are framed. They are not merely physical battles, but tests of judgment and character. Watching him navigate these moments, I couldn't help but recall countless literary protagonists who face similar trials, where the external obstacle is inseparable from internal growth. It's a narrative approach that resonates deeply with anyone who loves stories as a lens for understanding human nature. A key early development involves the introduction of allies, characters who, while diverse in temperament and background, share a common thread of courage and loyalty. These relationships are handled with a subtlety that I found refreshing. Instead of relying on cliché camaraderie, the story explores the tensions, doubts, and small acts of trust that form bonds between these figures. There's a scene where the hero and one of his companions confront a morally complex choice, and the tension is almost unbearable. I remember leaning forward, my heart racing, as I pondered how I might act in a similar situation. That's the beauty of these first sequences. They ground the mythic in the personal, the fantastical in the intimate. Interwoven with the human drama are early hints of the monstrous and the fantastic. The film introduces creatures and phenomena that are simultaneously terrifying and awe-inspiring, reminding the viewer of the vastness and unpredictability of this mythic universe. There's a sense of scale and danger that is both literal and symbolic. Each encounter with these beings tests the hero's courage, wit, and moral compass. I was particularly struck by the way the narrative blends suspense and revelation, allowing the audience to anticipate yet remain uncertain of what comes next. It reminded me of reading a favorite novel, where each chapter ends with a subtle hook that compels you to keep turning the page. One early turning point occurs when the protagonist receives guidance, or perhaps a warning, from a figure who straddles the line between human and divine. This character, enigmatic and often frustratingly cryptic, provides not only crucial information, but also philosophical reflection. I found these exchanges fascinating because they invite the audience to think beyond immediate plot concerns and consider larger thematic questions. The nature of destiny, the consequences of hubris, and the price of ambition. I remember pausing at one moment, struck by the resonance of a single line, realizing that these stories, though steeped in spectacle, are deeply reflective, engaging the mind as much as the senses. The narrative momentum is maintained by a series of escalating challenges, each one more complex and morally nuanced than the last. The hero is forced to make choices under pressure, confronting dilemmas where the correct path is far from clear. It's here that the story really begins to explore the interplay between courage, cunning, and conscience. Watching these sequences, I was reminded of the ethical quandaries in classical literature. The moments where the protagonist's decisions illuminate not only their character, but also larger truths about human nature. There is an almost tactile sense of suspense, a feeling that every action carries weight, every choice leaves a mark, and every consequence is a lesson waiting to be understood. Amidst this unfolding drama, the film takes care to develop the relationships and motivations of secondary characters. Allies and adversaries alike are given depth and nuance, making their interactions with the hero feel consequential. I was particularly captivated by a character whose loyalties are ambiguous, whose intentions are revealed in fragments that keep both the hero and the audience guessing. There's an intellectual satisfaction in these early narrative threads, an invitation to analyze, predict, and ponder motivations, much like piecing together a complex literary puzzle. It reminded me of reading intricate novels, where every minor character carries thematic weight, and every interaction offers insight into the central narrative. Conflict escalates naturally as the hero encounters both mortal and supernatural challenges, each carefully designed to reveal character and advance the thematic core of the story. There's a scene involving an imposing obstacle, one that combines physical danger with moral complexity, and I recall feeling both exhilarated and anxious as I watched. The narrative does not shy away from consequences, which lends a gravitas often absent in more conventional action-driven films. It's this careful balance between spectacle and introspection, danger and reflection, that makes the story feel both thrilling and intellectually engaging. I found myself reflecting not only on the hero's choices, but on the ways similar tensions play out in literature, myth, and even real life. The first major encounter with a monstrous adversary is a turning point in the narrative, a scene that combines tension, ingenuity, and emotional resonance. Unlike many cinematic portrayals of heroism, the focus is not purely on brute force. Instead, the sequence emphasizes strategy, moral choice, and the subtle interplay between courage and fear. I remember thinking how refreshing it was to see heroism depicted as thoughtful, multifaceted, and earned rather than simply conferred by destiny. This approach reminded me of classic literature, where heroes are tested not only by external threats, but also by their capacity for discernment, resilience, and ethical reflection. Throughout these early sequences, there are recurring motifs that invite deeper contemplation. Themes of revenge, loyalty, betrayal, and the human desire for transcendence recur subtly, woven into dialogue, visual symbolism, and narrative pacing. I was particularly taken with the way the film visualizes abstract concepts, hubris, divine interference, and the fragility of human society, through both imagery and plot developments. It's the kind of storytelling that rewards careful observation, where repeated viewings reveal layers of meaning that enrich understanding. I found myself noting parallels to literary texts that explore similar ideas, appreciating the way myth and modern storytelling can converse across time. Amid the tension and action, there are quieter, introspective moments that provide balance and depth. The hero, in rare moments of solitude, reflects on personal failure, loss, and the daunting nature of the tasks ahead. These scenes resonated with me on a personal level because they portray vulnerability as integral to heroism, not antithetical to it. In literature, these moments often reveal the inner life of characters in ways that heighten empathy and understanding, and the film captures this beautifully. I found myself lingering on these sequences, appreciating the nuanced attention to emotional truth amid the grandiose spectacle. The early portion of the story also explores the complicated dynamics between mortals and the divine, presenting both awe and tension in their interactions. The gods, while powerful and sometimes inscrutable, are not removed from narrative consequences. Their interventions catalyze action, provoke conflict, and illuminate moral and existential questions. Watching these interactions, I thought about the timeless fascination humans have had with the divine in literature, from epics to morality plays, and how these stories mirror our own struggles with authority, power, and the limits of human agency. It's a reflection that lingered with me, inviting contemplation about the stories we tell ourselves about fate, choice, and responsibility. As the narrative progresses, the stakes rise steadily. The hero faces increasingly intricate challenges, each demanding not just physical skill, but moral and intellectual discernment. I was impressed by the way the story escalates naturally, building tension while deepening character development. Early hints of betrayal and conflict between allies emerge, adding layers of intrigue and complexity. These developments are reminiscent of the narrative craftsmanship found in literary epics, where plot, character, and thematic resonance are carefully interwoven. Watching this unfold, I felt a sense of satisfaction and anticipation, eager to see how these threads would continue to develop. One of the most compelling aspects of this portion of the story is the way it portrays courage as multifaceted. The hero's bravery is expressed not only through acts of combat, but also through moral fortitude, quick thinking, and emotional honesty. I found this approach deeply resonant because it aligns with the kinds of heroism celebrated in literature, where true courage is often measured by ethical decision-making and the willingness to confront internal as well as external challenges. Scenes of suspense, danger, and ethical ambiguity provided me with a sense of immersion that was both exhilarating and thought-provoking. By the time the narrative reaches the midpoint of these events, the hero has been tested repeatedly, relationships have been strained and tested, and the broader stakes of the story, both mortal and divine, are firmly established. The story has succeeded not merely in entertaining, but in inviting reflection on themes that resonate across cultures and centuries. The tension between fate and free will, the costs of ambition, and the enduring human pursuit of meaning and understanding. I found myself reflecting on the broader implications of these developments, not only in the context of the story, but in relation to literature, mythology, and human experience more generally. Even as danger and uncertainty escalate, there is an undercurrent of hope and resilience that carries the narrative forward. The hero's journey is, at this stage, not simply about survival or victory. It is about growth, discovery, and the gradual realization of what it means to act with courage and integrity in a world fraught with peril. These early events, with their blend of spectacle, introspection, and thematic richness, set the stage for the deeper explorations and revelations to come, creating a narrative rhythm that is both engaging and intellectually satisfying. And so, as we linger on these moments, the small victories, the moral quandaries, the first glimpses of monstrous power and divine interference, We are invited to witness not just the unfolding of a story, but the evolution of a character whose journey mirrors our own struggles, hopes, and reflections. In many ways, these events feel like a meditation on life itself. A blend of challenge and insight, danger and wonder, failure and growth. I remember finishing this portion of the film and sitting in quiet contemplation, feeling that rare mixture of exhilaration and thoughtful introspection that only the most engaging narratives can provoke. As the narrative moves forward, the tension that has been steadily building finally begins to coalesce into moments of profound consequence. The hero, shaped by the trials he has endured, steps into situations that demand not only courage, but also clarity of heart and mind. There's a moment early on in this stage where he pauses, almost imperceptibly, in the midst of chaos, and I remember feeling a rush of admiration, not for some flashy feat of strength, but for the quiet, resolute decisiveness that marks true heroism. It's one of those small, almost private victories that speak volumes about character and intention, and it resonated deeply with me. The unfolding story does not allow the audience to linger too long in comfort. Danger and unpredictability remain ever present. The hero faces challenges that are increasingly labyrinthine, forcing him to rely on a mixture of instinct, intellect, and the counsel of allies whose loyalty has been tested time and again. I found myself reflecting on how, much like in literature, the hero's journey is as much about internal navigation as external adventure. Each confrontation, each puzzle, each moment of peril becomes a mirror reflecting the protagonist's inner landscape. His doubts, his fears, his resolve, and the moral code that guides him. A turning point emerges when an unexpected betrayal shakes the foundation of trust that has been slowly built. One of the companions, whose motives had been shadowed in ambiguity, makes a choice that changes the dynamics entirely. I remember my heart sinking at this moment, not simply because of the plot twist, but because it reminded me how fragile human relationships can be, how easily loyalty can be tested, and how difficult it is to discern true intentions. It is a moment that feels startlingly real, even amidst a world of gods and monsters, and it underscores a recurring theme. That heroism often requires navigating not only external dangers, but the unpredictable terrain of human emotion and choice. As events escalate, the hero's encounters with the monstrous and the divine intensify, each challenge more daunting than the last. There is a particular sequence where the stakes feel almost unbearably high, where every decision carries the weight of life and death, consequence and moral reflection. I remember gripping the edge of my seat, caught in a strange mix of awe and anxiety. What struck me most was the film's refusal to simplify these confrontations. The battles are not merely physical. They are intellectual and ethical tests, requiring the hero to consider both strategy and principle. It's a narrative choice that resonated with my own love for literature, where climaxes are often as much about choice and character as they are about external resolution. The plot intricately weaves revelations about lineage, destiny, and the intertwining of mortal and divine fates. The hero comes to understand truths that were previously obscured, some comforting, others devastating. There's a moment of recognition, a realization that the world is larger and more complex than previously imagined, that made me pause in contemplation. It felt akin to the moments in a novel where the protagonist's understanding of themselves and their universe shifts irrevocably, illuminating hidden connections and unseen consequences. In this story, these revelations heighten the emotional resonance, adding layers of meaning to the unfolding action. Throughout this portion of the narrative, the film continues to explore the delicate balance between trust and doubt. The hero must navigate alliances and rivalries, discerning who can be relied upon and who cannot. There is a particularly gripping scene where a moral decision must be made under the pressure of immediate danger, and the choice made has repercussions that ripple outward in surprising ways. I found myself reflecting on how these narrative choices mirror the dilemmas faced in classic literature. The tension between personal ethics and larger responsibilities, between impulse and reflection, between loyalty and self-preservation. It's this richness that makes the story feel alive, intellectually engaging, and emotionally compelling. The introduction of formidable new antagonists, monstrous, enigmatic, and often terrifying, pushes the hero to his limits. I was particularly struck by the visual and emotional weight of these encounters. The creatures are not just obstacles to be overcome, they are symbolic embodiments of fear, ambition, and chaos. Watching the hero confront them, I felt a sense of exhilaration and tension interwoven with deeper reflection. It is a reminder that in stories as in life, the greatest challenges are rarely simple. They require courage, wit, empathy, and sometimes a willingness to accept personal risk for the greater good. As the story approaches its climactic trajectory, the hero begins to synthesize lessons learned from previous trials. He recognizes the importance of foresight, the necessity of moral clarity, and the subtle power of resilience. I found these sequences particularly compelling because they portray growth as cumulative rather than sudden. Each choice, each misstep, each moment of reflection contributes to the person he is becoming, echoing the way character development unfolds in rich literary works. The hero's journey is not only physical, it is deeply intellectual and emotional, mirroring the complexity of the human experience itself. The climactic encounters are staged with a sense of grandeur and stakes that feel both epic and intimate. There is a tension between spectacle and emotional resonance that the film navigates beautifully. The hero confronts the ultimate antagonist in a sequence that tests everything he has learned: courage, cunning, empathy, and moral integrity. I remember feeling my pulse quicken as the narrative weaves together the threads of conflict, revelation, and personal stakes. What makes these moments compelling is not just the external drama, but the internal reckoning. The knowledge that the choices made here will define not only the outcome of the immediate struggle, but also the hero's identity and the ethical fabric of the world around him. Twists continue to unravel with deft precision. Allies and adversaries reveal hidden dimensions, and moments that seemed minor earlier acquire new significance. I was particularly captivated by the narrative's subtle layering of foreshadowing and payoff, which invites close attention and reflection. It's a storytelling technique I admire in literature, the kind of writing that rewards curiosity, where each observation, each detail, has the potential to illuminate a larger truth. These revelations bring both satisfaction and contemplation, merging the exhilaration of plot resolution with the intellectual pleasure of insight. Throughout the climactic sequences, the story emphasizes the consequences of pride, vengeance, and unchecked ambition. The antagonist's choices, though spectacularly dramatic, are grounded in motivations that are humanly understandable, even if morally questionable. I found this duality fascinating. The narrative refuses to present purely one-dimensional villains, instead offering characters whose complexity mirrors the richness of real life. Watching these moments unfold, I was reminded again of the way great literature often blurs the line between heroism and villainy, showing us that context, perspective, and motivation are crucial to understanding character. The resolution of the narrative, while visually and dramatically striking, is equally reflective. The hero emerges not as a conqueror, but as someone profoundly changed by experience, knowledge, and choice. I found myself lingering on the quiet aftermath, the moments where the hero contemplates what has been lost, what has been gained, and what it means to have acted with courage, integrity, and insight. These scenes resonate deeply because they remind us that stories are not only about action, but also about the human capacity for growth, reflection, and moral discernment. I was particularly moved by how the film reconciles its fantastical elements with deeply human truths. The final sequences do not simply offer spectacle for its own sake. They emphasize relational, ethical, and existential insights. Watching the hero and his companions navigate the concluding challenges, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction, not merely because conflicts were resolved, but because the narrative honored the journey, the choices, and the learning along the way. It reminded me of reading a novel where the resolution is not a neat ending, but a thoughtful meditation on the consequences of human action and the nature of courage and understanding. The concluding moments are layered with symbolism and reflection. The hero's path intersects with elements of fate, choice, and consequence in ways that are subtle yet deeply meaningful. I was struck by the resonance of these final images. They feel like a meditation on the interplay between human agency and the forces that shape our lives, a theme that has echoed across literature for centuries. It's a reminder that even in stories filled with mythic grandeur, the heart of the narrative is the human experience. Our struggles, triumphs, failures, and moments of clarity. Even as the cinematic spectacle fades and the narrative closes, the emotional and intellectual impact lingers. The hero's journey, rich with trials, revelations, and moral challenges, leaves an impression that goes beyond mere entertainment. I found myself reflecting on the enduring relevance of such stories, how myth and legend continue to offer insight into human nature, the dynamics of power, and the timeless pursuit of understanding and virtue. The narrative, in its blending of action, reflection, and philosophical depth, serves as both a thrilling adventure and a thoughtful meditation on existence itself. And so, as the story reaches its quiet culmination, I am left with a profound appreciation for the way it balances spectacle with introspection, adventure with reflection, and mythic drama with deeply human concerns. The journey has been exhilarating, intellectually stimulating, and emotionally resonant, a rare combination that reminds me why storytelling, whether in literature, myth, or cinema, holds such a vital place in our lives. Watching these final sequences, I felt not only satisfaction at the hero's growth and the resolution of conflict, but also a lingering curiosity about the larger questions raised, about fate, choice, courage, and the delicate, intricate web of human experience. Characters are the heartbeat of any story, and in this tale, they pulse with complexity, contradictions, and a quiet magnetism that drew me in almost immediately. From the very beginning, I found myself attuned not only to their actions, but to the subtler rhythms of their personalities, the moments where words and gestures betray hidden fears, aspirations, or unspoken truths. It's a reminder of why I have always loved literature, because through character, we come to inhabit perspectives far removed from our own, yet intimately familiar in their humanity. The hero, for instance, is a study in layered contradictions. At first glance, he appears to embody the archetype of the classical warrior, strong, determined, and guided by a sense of duty. Yet as the story unfolds, I found his humanity breaking through the heroic veneer in ways that felt both intimate and relatable. His doubts, his moments of hesitation, even his occasional lapses of judgment make him more than a figure of myth. They render him a mirror of the struggles we all face when confronted with responsibility and moral complexity. I remember a particular moment when he pauses before taking action, reflecting not only on the immediate danger, but also on the potential consequences for those he cares about. It was such a small gesture, yet it revealed volumes about his moral architecture, his capacity for empathy, and the subtle courage it takes to act rightly in a world fraught with ambiguity. The hero's journey is deeply intertwined with the question of identity. He grapples with questions of lineage, destiny, and self-understanding, and these struggles resonate beyond the literal narrative. I found myself considering how our own lives are often shaped by forces beyond our immediate control, heritage, circumstance, and expectation, and how much of true growth comes from navigating those currents with integrity. Watching him wrestle with these questions, I felt a kinship with his search for meaning, a recognition of the universal human desire to reconcile personal choice with inherited responsibility. By his side, the companions each contribute unique textures to the story, and I was struck by how the narrative affords them space to breathe, to grow, and to reveal depth beyond archetypal roles. There is the loyal friend whose humor and resilience provide relief in the darkest moments. Yet beneath the surface lies an intelligence and sensitivity that often go unnoticed. It reminded me of the wayside characters in classic novels often serve as mirrors or contrasts to the protagonist, revealing hidden facets of the central figure while also possessing their own intricate interior lives. I found myself rooting for this character, not just for their courage in battle, but for their quiet moral compass and the understated wisdom they bring to the group. Another companion presents a more enigmatic presence, at once alluring and elusive, their motives shaded in subtle ambiguity. I remember feeling a mixture of intrigue and suspicion as they navigated alliances and obstacles, their choices often unpredictable, yet always revealing deeper truths about human nature. That we are rarely wholly transparent, that even loyalty can coexist with self-interest, and that personal history can shape decisions in ways that are neither simple nor entirely rational. This complexity, which might be dismissed in a casual viewing as mere plot device, is what I found intellectually and emotionally compelling. It is a reminder that character is never static, and that growth, or revelation, often emerges from tension, contradiction, and challenge. The antagonists, too, deserve careful reflection. Far from being one-dimensional embodiments of evil, they operate with motivations that, while morally questionable, are coherent, even relatable in a certain sense. The primary antagonist is driven by ambition, pride, and a desire to assert dominion over forces beyond his comprehension. Watching him maneuver, scheme, and confront the hero, I felt an unsettling recognition. The very traits that make him dangerous, his cunning, determination, and strategic acumen, are not inherently malevolent. They are human capacities twisted by obsession and ethical blindness. It struck me how this mirrors literary traditions where villains are not merely obstacles, but complex figures whose flaws and desires illuminate aspects of the human condition. In some ways, his presence casts a shadow over the narrative that forces the hero, and the audience, to confront the fragile boundaries between right and wrong, courage and hubris. Secondary antagonists and mythical creatures add further richness to the character tapestry. Each entity, whether divine or monstrous, carries symbolic weight, embodying themes like fear, chaos, and the unforeseen consequences of ambition. I found myself considering how these figures function, not only as physical threats, but as catalysts for moral and psychological exploration. Their confrontations with the hero are as much about self-discovery, ethical decision-making, and resilience as they are about physical victory. Watching these moments, I was reminded of the power of allegory in literature. Even fantastical figures can reveal profound truths about character, choice, and consequence. The dynamic between hero and antagonist is particularly fascinating. It is not a simple battle of good versus evil, but a complex interplay of intellect, moral perspective, and emotional insight. The tension lies not only in physical conflict, but in the contest of values, strategies, and foresight. I found myself contemplating how literature often thrives on this kind of moral and psychological duality. The hero is defined not merely by actions, but by the contrasts and confrontations that test their essence. The antagonist, in turn, is illuminated by these conflicts, revealing layers that might otherwise remain hidden. This interplay is what gives the narrative emotional and intellectual weight, and it is what makes the characters linger in memory long after the story ends. Supporting characters, too, are imbued with resonance that extends beyond their immediate narrative function. There is a mentor figure whose wisdom is conveyed in subtle gestures, advice, and moral example. I was struck by the quiet dignity and gravitas of these moments, which reminded me of the way guiding figures in literature often catalyze reflection, growth, and revelation. The mentor's presence is a stabilizing force, but also a challenge. Their counsel requires discernment, courage, and ethical engagement, underscoring that wisdom alone is not sufficient. It must be acted upon thoughtfully and with integrity. Romantic and relational dynamics in the story are handled with similar subtlety. Affections and tensions develop not as plot contrivances, but as reflections of character growth, vulnerability, and mutual respect. I appreciated how these relationships are allowed to evolve organically, marked by moments of doubt, hesitation, and revelation. They do not overshadow the broader narrative, yet they add layers of emotional texture, reminding the audience that heroism and adventure exist alongside human connection, empathy, and love. These aspects of character development struck me as particularly resonant, because they echo the ways in which relationships in real life shape, challenge, and illuminate who we are. I was especially intrigued by how the narrative explores moral ambiguity in its characters. Even those whose actions appear virtuous are occasionally confronted with ethical dilemmas that force reflection, compromise, or unexpected risk. Conversely, characters whose behavior seems selfish or destructive are given moments of vulnerability, remorse, or insight that complicate our judgments. I found these nuances immensely satisfying, because they resist the simplicity of traditional hero/villain binaries, and invite a deeper engagement with character psychology. It reminded me of the best literature, where moral complexity is a defining feature, and where the reader, or viewer, is invited to consider motivations, consequences, and internal struggles rather than accepting superficial categorizations. One of the most compelling aspects of the story is how the hero's companions reflect, challenge, and illuminate his character. Each interacts with him in ways that reveal strengths, weaknesses, and ethical commitments. I was particularly drawn to moments of tension, when competing interests or perspectives force dialogue, reflection, and decision. These sequences feel rich because they echo the interpersonal dynamics found in literature, where relationships are not static, but continually negotiated, tested, and deepened by circumstance, conflict, and empathy. The characters' interactions provide a kind of moral and emotional scaffolding that makes the story's climactic and reflective moments resonate more profoundly. There is also a fascinating interplay between mortal and divine characters. The presence of gods, semi-divine beings, and mythical entities creates a layered hierarchy of influence and power, which serves to heighten both stakes and philosophical reflection. I found it compelling how the narrative examines human agency within the context of forces beyond comprehension, exploring themes of destiny, choice, and ethical responsibility. The hero, in navigating these relationships, demonstrates not only courage, but also insight, adaptability, and the capacity to balance reverence for greater powers with the assertion of personal agency. These dynamics enrich the character landscape, making each interaction a meditation on power, morality, and self-determination. As the story progresses, characters grow not only through action, but through revelation. Secrets, hidden motivations, and past experiences come to light, reshaping relationships and self-perception. I was particularly drawn to the subtle moments where understanding emerges, when a glance, a confession, or a shared trial alters the narrative fabric and forces reconsideration of prior judgments. These moments, though often fleeting, are emotionally and intellectually powerful, reminding me why literature and thoughtful storytelling linger in memory. They offer insight into the subtle mechanics of identity, motivation, and relational influence. The hero's moral and psychological evolution is mirrored by the transformation of those around him. Companions gain courage, insight, or ethical clarity through trials, while antagonists are revealed to possess dimensions of complexity that defy simplistic condemnation. I found this interplay fascinating because it underscores the narrative's insistence on the interdependence of character, that growth, understanding, and ethical action are rarely solitary endeavors, but emerge through interaction, challenge, and reflection. This is a principle I have long admired in literature, and seeing it enacted so vividly in a cinematic context was both satisfying and thought-provoking. Even the briefest characters are given touches of nuance that reward careful attention. A fleeting gesture, a line of dialogue, or a decision under pressure can reveal entire swaths of personality, ethical stance, or relational dynamics. I found myself noting these moments, reflecting on how even minor figures contribute to the moral and emotional texture of the story. This attention to detail, both by the filmmakers and by the narrative itself, elevates the work beyond simple spectacle into the realm of thoughtful, reflective storytelling. In the end, the story's characters linger not because of grandiose displays of power or dramatic flair alone, but because they are crafted with attention to complexity, contradiction, and depth. I was struck by how each figure, whether hero, companion, or antagonist, offers insight into courage, morality, human limitation, and the quest for understanding. They inhabit a space that feels both mythic and profoundly relatable, bridging the gap between legend and lived experience. Observing their journeys, I was reminded of the power of literature and film to illuminate not only heroic deeds, but the subtle moral and psychological currents that shape our lives. What ultimately makes these characters memorable is the way they exist in tension between action and reflection, courage and doubt, destiny and choice. I found myself thinking about how rare it is to encounter stories where every major character carries both narrative and ethical weight, where each choice resonates beyond the immediate moment, and where complexity is valued over simplicity. These are the figures that linger in imagination, prompting repeated reflection, discussion, and insight long after the story concludes. I've always been fascinated by what happens behind the camera. The hidden stories, the mishaps, and the creative sparks that give life to a film long before it ever reaches the screen. And when I think about this particular story, there are countless little-known details and strange occurrences that made its creation feel almost as epic and mythic as the narrative itself. It's remarkable to me how a story about gods, monsters, and heroes can reflect the unpredictable, sometimes chaotic nature of human endeavor in the filmmaking process. These are the moments that remind me that movies, like literature, are living, breathing creations, full of unexpected twists both on-screen and off. One of the first things that struck me was how much the director and production team leaned into practical effects, despite the heavy reliance on CGI for the monstrous creatures. There's a story that during the filming of a scene involving the Kraken, the crew actually built a massive mechanical arm designed to simulate the creature's tentacle. Watching it move across the set was apparently a mixture of awe and terror for everyone involved. The scale was so enormous that even simple movements caused minor tremors in the studio floor. I find that fascinating because it underscores the tactile, almost obsessive commitment filmmakers often have to bringing mythical elements to life in a way that feels physically real. Even if the CGI eventually replaces much of it, that underlying physicality gives the creatures an eerie, grounded presence. Speaking of the Kraken, the design process for this colossal creature was itself a story of trial, error, and sheer imagination. Early concept art apparently depicted it with multiple heads, a more serpentine body, and glowing bioluminescent patterns along its tentacles. There were heated debates among the design team about how monstrous versus believable it should look. I love imagining those discussions, where artists, engineers, and storytellers all had to negotiate a delicate balance, making something awe-inspiring and terrifying while avoiding tipping into the absurd. I think that tension mirrors the very story itself. Mythical, larger-than-life stakes constrained by the need for human emotional resonance. The production's dedication to realism extended to the actors as well. I was intrigued to learn that several of the fight sequences were rehearsed extensively with real choreography before any CGI was added. One of the more unusual anecdotes I came across involved the hero's climactic battle against a minotaur-like creature. The stunt team actually spent weeks designing a mechanical bull that could simulate blows and reactions, so that the actors could react authentically. They reportedly had to test the mechanism in a controlled environment multiple times because it occasionally kicked a little too enthusiastically. It's funny to think about, and it makes me smile imagining stunt performers trying to balance heroism with self-preservation while a mechanical monster lurks in the background. One of the strangest production stories involves the weather. There were days when outdoor scenes, carefully planned weeks in advance, were disrupted by unseasonal rainstorms or intense winds. On one occasion, a desert sequence, intended to evoke a dry, mythic wasteland, was transformed overnight into a muddy, treacherous expanse. Rather than scrapping the scene, the director embraced it, incorporating the elements into the narrative and having the cinematographer frame the landscape in a way that made the rain feel almost like an otherworldly, divine intervention. I find that so beautifully ironic. The story itself is about divine whims, and here in reality, the weather behaves like a capricious god, shaping the story in unforeseen ways. Casting had its own quirks. I read about an early round of auditions for the main antagonist, where several performers brought interpretations that were wildly different from what the director ultimately envisioned. Some leaned into over-the-top theatricality, while others delivered chillingly subtle performances. Apparently, one particularly eccentric actor showed up in full costume, complete with armor and a handmade trident, insisting it would help him channel the energy of the ancient gods. While the final casting chose someone else, the anecdote highlights the kind of mythic energy and commitment people were bringing to the project. It reminds me of reading about auditions for Shakespearean plays, where actors try to inhabit larger-than-life roles in the most literal and imaginative ways possible. Then there's the music. The score, which adds so much grandeur and emotional depth, had its own behind-the-scenes drama. The composer reportedly experimented with unconventional instruments and sounds to capture a sense of ancient, otherworldly tension. Some sessions involved layering recordings of unusual percussion instruments, animal calls, and even subtle metallic echoes to create a sonic landscape that felt both epic and organic. I find this so fascinating because it mirrors the story's tension between myth and human experience. The music has to be grand enough to suggest divine influence, yet grounded enough to evoke real, visceral emotion. It's a delicate balance, and knowing that this experimentation occurred makes listening to the soundtrack feel almost like eavesdropping on a secret laboratory of sound. Another fascinating facet is the involvement of cultural consultants. Mythology and legend are often treated loosely in modern adaptations, but the production sought input from historians and classical scholars to ensure that certain elements, costumes, weapon designs, and symbolic gestures, resonated with ancient traditions, even if stylized. I love that commitment to authenticity, because it gives the film an undercurrent of intellectual rigor. While I've never been a stickler for historical accuracy in fantasy, knowing that thought and research went into these choices makes the story richer, more textured, and respectful of the mythological heritage it draws upon. Practical effects didn't stop with creatures and weather. The set design itself had stories of its own. I came across a detail about a colossal temple interior built for a key sequence. The set was so vast that crew members used walkie-talkies just to communicate across its expanse. And because of the scale, some minor structural elements shifted slightly during filming, leading to spontaneous adjustments in camera angles and choreography. It's a reminder that filmmaking, especially on a mythic scale, is an art of improvisation as much as planning. I like imagining the crew hustling across massive sets, making split-second creative decisions, and shaping the narrative in real time. Even wardrobe had oddities. Some costumes, particularly those for the warrior characters, were so heavy and intricate that actors had to undergo conditioning just to endure long shooting days. One particularly memorable anecdote described an actor fainting during a grueling sequence because the armor was both weighty and confining, making it difficult to regulate temperature. They resumed filming only after adjustments were made, but the story underscores the physicality and sacrifice involved in inhabiting these roles. It reminds me of historical epics, where performers often risked their well-being to convey the gravitas and danger of battle. There were also reports of minor but amusing on-set hauntings. Crew members claimed that the massive statues and intricate carvings, designed to look ancient and imposing, sometimes created eerie optical illusions under certain lighting conditions. Some swore they caught glimpses of shadows moving in ways that weren't explained by actors or equipment. While probably just tricks of light and human imagination, I love the notion that even the sets themselves seem to harbor a touch of mythic mystery, reflecting the story's themes of divine presence and supernatural unpredictability. Stunts, naturally, had their own strange and intense stories. One particular action sequence involved a chain of actors and stunt doubles navigating crumbling platforms, swinging chains, and bursts of pyrotechnics. According to reports, one take went awry when a swinging chain struck a prop in an unexpected way, sending sparks flying. The crew reportedly paused, assessed, and then decided to incorporate the accidental effect into the final shot because it added a visceral, chaotic energy to the scene. I find this so emblematic of filmmaking. Sometimes accidents, rather than setbacks, become creative gifts that enhance the final product. It's almost as if the film itself were alive, shaping its own mythic destiny alongside the humans creating it. Visual effects, of course, presented challenges and curiosities as well. I read about the painstaking process of rendering the winged horse Pegasus. The team experimented with dozens of variations on wing size, feather texture, and movement, consulting zoologists and aerodynamic studies to make it feel both fantastical and believable. Some early CGI tests, apparently, were so lifelike that they unsettled the actors, who found it difficult to react naturally to a creature that seemed almost tangible, even when it existed only on a monitor. I love that idea, that even in a highly fantastical world, the tension between reality and imagination is palpable, influencing performance, direction, and audience perception. Editing, too, had its oddities. There were sequences initially intended to be far longer, or entirely different, including alternate approaches to climactic battles. One scene reportedly included a longer dialogue exchange between the hero and a divine figure, exploring themes of mortality and destiny in more philosophical terms. Ultimately, the sequence was trimmed for pacing, but the anecdote shows how much deliberation went into balancing intellectual depth with the kinetic demands of cinematic spectacle. I find that fascinating, because it highlights the tension between storytelling ambition and audience engagement, a balancing act familiar to any lover of literature, where editors similarly shape, prune, and refine narrative without erasing the story's heart. Even marketing contributed some strange stories. The team behind promotional material reportedly debated extensively about which creature or scene would serve as the film's iconic image. Early posters featured fantastical designs that never made it to theaters, including bizarre, almost surreal renditions of the Kraken looming over the hero. It's funny to think about how much unseen effort and experimentation underpins the way audiences first encounter a film, shaping expectation before the story itself even begins. There are also bizarre coincidences worth noting. I read that on the day of filming a particular storm scene, lightning actually struck a nearby filming location not far from set, sending crew members scurrying for safety. No one was hurt, thankfully, but the incident became a sort of in-joke, a divine reminder that filming a story about gods and monsters might attract the attention of real-world elements. I love stories like this because they make the creative process feel alive, unpredictable, and almost magical, blurring the lines between myth and reality. Even minor props had peculiar stories. Weapons, armor, and artifacts designed for the film often underwent multiple iterations to ensure they looked historically grounded while allowing actors to perform convincingly. Some props, designed to be lightweight, broke during action sequences, leading to impromptu repairs or entirely new creations. I can't help but imagine a prop master frantically improvising with glue, leather, and metal to make sure the next take could proceed without compromising realism or continuity. Lastly, there's the human element, how cast and crew bonded over shared challenges. Long shoots, physically demanding stunts, and emotional scenes fostered camaraderie that sometimes mirrored the story's themes of loyalty, courage, and shared struggle. I found that element particularly resonant. The creation of a mythic tale requires not only imagination and technical skill, but empathy, trust, and collaboration. It's a reminder that even the most fantastical stories are grounded in human effort, relationships, and the subtle, unpredictable rhythms of daily work. It's always been something of a thrill for me to watch a film and feel its pulse. Not just the spectacle on screen, but the subtler heartbeat that runs beneath the action, the rhythm that shapes how we respond, empathize, and reflect. As I watched this story unfold, I found myself thinking less about the literal battles or monstrous confrontations, and more about what these events were trying to convey beneath the surface. Ideas about fate, courage, divine will, human resilience, and the tension between mortality and myth. Those layers are what I want to explore, because they are the true marrow of the experience, the reason the story continues to echo in my mind long after the credits roll. One of the first sequences that really struck me was the opening, the way the world was introduced, not with exposition, but with an almost poetic sense of tension. The gods' decision to strip humanity of divine favor isn't merely a plot device. It frames the entire narrative with an existential weight. From a critical standpoint, this moment establishes a recurring motif of human agency versus divine determinism. I remember feeling, even as the scene played out, that it mirrored philosophical questions I'd wrestled with in literature. To what extent are we architects of our fate, and how much of our lives are manipulated by forces beyond our comprehension? That tension, present from the first scene, carries throughout the story, giving even the most fantastical events a kind of moral and emotional grounding. The hero's early journey into self-discovery is another event that, on the surface, may seem like a simple coming-of-age arc, but when I step back and reflect critically, it resonates much deeper. Watching him navigate the treacherous political landscape, wrestle with questions of identity, and confront his own limitations, I was reminded of the literary heroes I've cherished: Odysseus, Beowulf, even modern reinterpretations like Harry Potter. Each of these figures faces not just external threats, but internal reckonings. Here, the story cleverly intertwines the external and internal conflicts, making the audience invest emotionally in both the hero's physical battles and the ethical dilemmas that accompany them. That duality is what gives the narrative a kind of philosophical richness, one that rewards careful viewing and reflection. One particularly striking event is the encounter with the Stygian witches, those three blind, prophetic figures whose presence is brief, yet charged with meaning. Critically, I see this scene as more than just a supernatural obstacle. It's a moment that confronts the hero with ambiguity, a reminder that guidance is rarely simple, that truth and prophecy can be cryptic and demanding. The cinematography, dimly lit and suffused with eerie tension, reinforces a sense of moral and intellectual challenge. I remember leaning forward, intrigued not by action, but by the ethical puzzle being presented. From a thematic perspective, this moment underscores the film's engagement with the limits of human understanding. Even heroes must wrestle with uncertainty, making choices without the comfort of absolute knowledge. The journey to collect divine weapons is another fascinating locus of thematic weight. On one level, it's a straightforward quest: acquire tools, vanquish monsters, save the world. But critically, I read it as a meditation on human reliance on external power versus inner strength. The hero is guided by gods and aided by enchanted artifacts, yet it is his judgment, courage, and moral reasoning that determine success. This dynamic mirrors broader literary and philosophical debates, the interplay between fate, providence, and personal agency. Watching these sequences, I was reminded of the tension in classic epics, where divine intervention exists, but never fully absolves the human characters from responsibility. It's subtle, but it shapes the audience's emotional engagement, making triumphs feel earned and failures resonate deeply. The confrontations with monsters, each increasingly grotesque and awe-inspiring, serve both narrative and thematic functions. Take, for example, the battle with the Medusa-like creature. It's visually dazzling, but it also functions as a meditation on fear, perception, and mortality. The use of mirrors and reflective surfaces is more than a visual gimmick. It becomes a narrative metaphor, asking us to consider the dangers of obsession, hubris, and the desire to control forces beyond comprehension. I found this dual layer of meaning particularly compelling, because it transformed what could have been simple action into something intellectually stimulating. The visual spectacle becomes a conduit for reflection. How we confront the unknown, how we process terror, and how courage often involves more than brute strength. It demands insight, cunning, and self-knowledge. There's a pivotal event where the hero must confront the Kraken. Critically speaking, this is not just an action set piece. It's the narrative crucible in which his growth, moral resolve, and relationship to divine authority are tested. The tension in the scene is meticulously constructed. Rapid cuts, close-ups of emotion, the overwhelming scale of the monster juxtaposed with the vulnerability of the hero. From a literary perspective, this sequence mirrors mythic confrontations where human characters must engage with forces larger than life. Yet the filmmakers also embedded an emotional core. The hero's choices directly influence not just survival, but the ethical outcome for those he loves. I remember being struck by the way fear, hope, and responsibility were interwoven. It's a sequence that rewards viewers who pay attention to character psychology, not just spectacle. Another event that stands out is the interaction between the hero and the gods themselves. These moments are layered with irony, humor, and subtle critique. Critically, the narrative positions the gods as capricious, morally ambiguous figures whose influence is both helpful and hindering. Their presence challenges traditional notions of divine omnipotence and benevolence. I found myself reflecting on the ethical implications. What does it mean to struggle under divine oversight? How does human resilience develop in the shadow of powers beyond comprehension? These interactions give the story a philosophical texture, inviting contemplation rather than passive consumption. It's a level of engagement that I personally find thrilling because it transforms what could have been a straightforward fantasy into a meditation on morality, power, and autonomy. The emotional resonance of family and loyalty emerges powerfully during the hero's interactions with loved ones. In scenes where he must make impossible choices, the stakes feel personal and intimate, grounding the larger-than-life action in human experience. From a critical perspective, these moments provide counterbalance. The narrative isn't merely about monsters and divine politics, but about empathy, sacrifice, and the cost of heroism. I remember feeling an unexpected pang of emotion during a scene where the hero confronts the consequences of his actions on those he cares for. It's that interweaving of grand spectacle and intimate human drama that gives the film its emotional weight and contributes to its enduring appeal. There's also an undercurrent of political allegory woven throughout key events. The narrative presents kingdoms, rulers, and common folk whose fates are intertwined with divine whims and heroic deeds. Critically, this invites reflection on leadership, responsibility, and social dynamics. Watching these sequences, I found myself considering how mythic narratives often mirror contemporary concerns. How those in power negotiate morality, how individuals respond to systemic forces, and how courage and cunning can reshape destinies. It's an intellectual layer that may escape casual viewing, but for someone with a literary or philosophical sensibility, it adds remarkable depth. The climactic confrontation is particularly fascinating from a critical standpoint because it synthesizes multiple thematic threads: courage, moral choice, human-divine interplay, and mortality. The pacing, tension, and visual storytelling converge to create a sense of inevitability tempered by uncertainty. Each action feels consequential, each decision morally weighted. As I watched, I was struck by how the filmmakers balance spectacle with reflection. The audience is exhilarated by action, yes, but also invited to ponder ethical and existential questions. This is the hallmark of narratives that endure. Stories that operate simultaneously on emotional, intellectual, and symbolic levels. The resolution, too, is worth contemplating critically. It doesn't provide tidy answers or simplistic triumphs. Instead, it emphasizes the cost of heroism, the complexity of moral choices, and the ongoing tension between human agency and cosmic forces. I was particularly impressed by the narrative restraint. The story allows consequences to linger, rather than neatly resolving every thread. From an analytical perspective, this enhances the film's resonance. Viewers leave with questions, reflections, and a heightened appreciation for the interplay between fate, courage, and ethical responsibility. Throughout the narrative, recurring motifs, mirrors, wings, water, and celestial imagery, serve as critical touchstones. They are not mere decorative elements. They reinforce the story's philosophical and emotional preoccupations. For instance, Water appears repeatedly as both a literal and symbolic element, representing chaos, transformation, and the fluidity of human experience. Wings, similarly, evoke freedom, transcendence, and the delicate balance between aspiration and hubris. Engaging with these motifs critically enriches the viewing experience, transforming visual spectacle into narrative poetry. Even minor events, the hero's interactions with supporting characters, brief exchanges with monsters, and subtle gestures of humor or defiance, contribute to thematic and emotional depth. Each is carefully calibrated to reinforce character development, illuminate moral dilemmas, or provide contrast to epic confrontations. Critically, these nuances exemplify how attentive storytelling layers meaning across narrative scales, from intimate micro-moments to grand, climactic battles. I find that this layering is what makes thoughtful rewatching so rewarding. Each viewing reveals new insights, new thematic resonances, new emotional subtleties. I was particularly struck by the film's treatment of courage, not as a simple absence of fear, but as a conscious engagement with risk, uncertainty, and moral complexity. Several sequences illustrate this beautifully, where the hero confronts threats far larger than himself, yet acts with deliberation, empathy, and reflection. Critically, this approach aligns with classical heroic paradigms, yet it is filtered through a modern sensibility. Courage is as much ethical as it is physical, and the consequences of action are treated with realism and gravitas. That subtlety elevates the narrative, making it both intellectually and emotionally satisfying. The interplay of visual spectacle and narrative meaning also invites critical reflection. Battles, divine interventions, and monstrous encounters are choreographed not only for excitement, but to emphasize character choice, ethical tension, and thematic resonance. I often found myself pausing, not literally, of course, but mentally, examining how camera angles, lighting, and pacing contributed to the emotional and intellectual impact of a scene. It's this meticulous attention to form and content that distinguishes stories that linger from those that fade quickly. Even humor and levity are strategically placed, offering respite while simultaneously enhancing thematic contrast. Comedic moments underscore human resilience, social dynamics, and the absurdity of encountering forces beyond comprehension. Critically, this balancing of tone strengthens engagement. It allows the audience to experience awe, tension, and reflection in a rhythm that mirrors the hero's own journey. I love how even the smallest humorous beats can deepen emotional connection while reinforcing philosophical undercurrents. There's something uniquely enchanting about the way a film comes to life behind the camera, the way invisible hands, tireless minds, and bursts of serendipity converge to create a world that seems utterly self-contained, yet belongs simultaneously to every viewer who experiences it. As I delved into the making of this particular story, I found myself mesmerized by the alchemy of its creation, the blend of artistry, engineering, sheer determination, and sometimes sheer chaos that animates a tale so grand. The production, in many ways, feels like an epic in its own right, a drama of its own, with triumphs, setbacks, and moments of brilliance that echo the story it seeks to tell. One of the first things that struck me when learning about the filmmaking process was how meticulously the creators approached the visual design. The task was enormous. How to create a mythic world that feels both timeless and contemporary, ancient yet convincingly real. Every frame, every set, every piece of digital magic was subject to scrutiny. I found myself imagining the creative meetings, with designers, directors, and visual effects supervisors huddled around storyboards, arguing passionately about how a temple should look, or how a monster's scales should catch the light. There's a thrill in that kind of creative tension, the feeling that each artistic choice carries weight, shaping not just the look of the film, but its emotional resonance and mythic authenticity. The director's vision, as I discovered, was both ambitious and highly collaborative. He approached the story not as a mere retelling of legend, but as a cinematic meditation on heroism, choice, and mortality. I was fascinated by the way he worked with actors, urging them to internalize the mythology and make it personal, to bring their own humanity into a world populated by gods and monsters. I imagine long hours on set, where the camera is poised, light just so, and yet the conversation between director and actor might pause for a philosophical discussion. How does a hero truly confront fear? What does loyalty mean when the world itself conspires against you? That level of thoughtfulness is rare in big-budget filmmaking, and it's part of what gives the story a depth that lingers long after watching. The casting process itself had its own fascinating stories. Choosing actors for a narrative so steeped in myth required balancing physical presence, emotional nuance, and the ability to carry complex thematic weight. I learned that the lead actor was drawn to the story not simply for its spectacle, but for its exploration of identity and moral responsibility. On set, there are anecdotes of long discussions about how a gesture, a glance, or a subtle shift in posture could convey the hero's inner struggle. It's compelling to think that even in a film filled with monsters, gods, and epic battles, the human subtleties were treated with equal reverence. Costume design, as you might expect, became a near-legendary aspect of the production. The artists tasked with outfitting gods, humans, and monsters alike pored over ancient texts, sculptures, and cultural artifacts to create clothing and armor that felt authentic yet cinematic. I found it fascinating that certain textures and color palettes were chosen not only for aesthetic appeal, but to subtly reinforce character and theme. The hero's armor, for instance, is both functional and symbolic. Each line, each detail, reflects moral fortitude, vulnerability, and evolution. I can imagine the costume department working tirelessly, hands covered in leather and metal, debating how to balance practicality for the actors with visual storytelling that communicates character growth silently, frame by frame. The visual effects team deserves a special spotlight. Their work involved crafting creatures that had to be simultaneously terrifying, majestic, and believable. I read that there were countless iterations for each monster, subtle adjustments to scale, texture, movement, and behavior, all designed to ensure that audiences would feel a real sense of danger and awe. One of my favorite insights is how they studied animal locomotion, combining it with mythological imagination, to give each creature an organic presence. It's fascinating to imagine animators leaning over screens, adjusting tendons, muscles, and eye movements, debating how to make a creature both frightening and emotionally resonant. The result, on screen, feels effortless, but the reality behind it is sheer, painstaking craft. Filming on location brought its own share of challenges and surprises. From harsh climates to unpredictable weather, the crew often had to improvise and adapt. I found myself smiling at stories of moments when actors and production staff were literally drenched in storms conjured for the scene, only to emerge exhausted but exhilarated, laughing at the chaos. Those moments are a reminder that filmmaking, especially one of this scale, is as much a human adventure as a technical endeavor. There's camaraderie, ingenuity, and the occasional bout of sheer luck, all of which seep into the final product in subtle ways. The use of sound and music in the production also has a fascinating backstory. The composer was tasked with blending the grandeur of myth with emotional intimacy, creating motifs that could carry both epic battles and personal introspection. I was intrigued to learn that certain musical cues were inspired by classical compositions, aiming to evoke a sense of timelessness while supporting the narrative's emotional arcs. Even minor sound effects, the rustle of wings, the ripple of water, the echo of divine footsteps, were treated with care, carefully layered to enhance tension, wonder, and immersion. It's these invisible choices that enrich the viewing experience, giving a scene its visceral impact without the audience always being consciously aware of it. There are numerous anecdotes about the camaraderie and unexpected moments on set that became part of the lore of this film. For instance, one of the actors reportedly improvised a small gesture in a tense moment, a subtle shift in posture that wasn't scripted, and the director immediately realized it captured the essence of the character perfectly. That improvisation remained in the film, a testament to the fluid collaboration that defines great productions. I love that, even in a carefully orchestrated cinematic universe, small human moments find their way into the story, leaving traces of spontaneity and authenticity. The editing process is another arena filled with fascinating insights. I learned that multiple versions of several key sequences were created, experimenting with pacing, angle, and timing to achieve maximum narrative and emotional impact. In some cases, entire shots were added or removed to better convey moral tension, suspense, or thematic resonance. I can vividly picture the editors huddled in dark rooms, watching playback after playback, debating rhythm, emotional beats, and continuity. It's a reminder that the final cut of a film is never a single vision, but the result of countless collaborative decisions, negotiations, and refinements. The film's relationship with mythology also sparked interesting production debates. How faithful should the story be to original legends? How much should it reinterpret or innovate for modern audiences? I found the discussions about these choices particularly compelling because they illustrate the tension between tradition and creativity. Certain narrative liberties were taken, but always with careful thought, to enhance drama or clarify themes. For me, it's fascinating to see how ancient stories are continuously reimagined, and how the production team balanced reverence for source material with the demands of cinematic storytelling. Stunts and choreography bring another layer of behind-the-scenes intrigue. I read about sequences where actors trained intensively for weeks, learning not only combat techniques, but also the physical language of mythic heroism. The stunt coordinators blended historical martial arts, acrobatics, and cinematic spectacle to make the action feel both thrilling and grounded. I found myself reflecting on the dual artistry involved. Choreography must satisfy both the practicalities of safety and the poetic demands of storytelling. Every leap, swing, or strike carries narrative meaning, contributing to tension, character development, and visual poetry. One of my favorite production anecdotes involves the creation of a particularly formidable monster. The design team experimented with dozens of iterations, trying to achieve a balance between terror and pathos. At one point, a creature that looked too monstrous was paired with subtle behavioral tweaks to convey a hint of vulnerability, creating a more complex emotional response in the audience. I love that idea. Even the most fantastical beings on screen are shaped with empathy, a reminder that storytelling is as much about psychology and emotion as it is about visual spectacle. Lighting, too, had its share of artistry and experimentation. Cinematographers worked to create contrasts between mortal and divine realms, using shadow and illumination to reinforce thematic resonance. Certain scenes required delicate coordination between natural light, artificial lighting, and post-production effects. I found it fascinating that sometimes a single ray of sunlight or a carefully angled shadow could alter the emotional tenor of an entire scene, highlighting the meticulous care invested in every visual choice. Even wardrobe malfunctions and technical hiccups became stories of ingenuity. There are tales of quick fixes on set, of props improvisationally reinforced, of costumes adjusted mid-shoot to accommodate stunts, all of which required creative problem-solving under pressure. These moments, while minor in the grand narrative, are emblematic of the human ingenuity that drives film production. They remind me that movies, like literature, are collaborative endeavors where flexibility and invention are just as crucial as vision and skill. I also discovered interesting trivia about the digital compositing process. Certain sequences were constructed entirely in post-production, requiring teams to blend live-action footage with computer-generated environments seamlessly. I found myself fascinated by the iterative nature of this work. Render, review, tweak, repeat, often hundreds of times. The result on screen feels effortless, but the reality behind it is intense, precise, and almost invisible to the casual viewer, a testament to both patience and artistry. Practical effects deserve special mention as well. Despite the heavy use of digital imagery, physical sets, props, and makeup played crucial roles. There's a story of a massive, intricately designed creature puppet, manipulated by dozens of crew members, interacting with the actors in real time. These tactile effects provide grounding, making the fantastical feel tangible. I love the interplay between the digital and the physical, and how careful blending of these worlds can make the cinematic experience feel both grand and believable. The marketing and promotional strategy for the film is another interesting layer. Early concept art, trailers, and behind-the-scenes features were carefully curated to create intrigue without revealing critical plot points. I was fascinated by how the production team navigated audience expectations, teasing spectacle while emphasizing the emotional and thematic depth of the story. It reminded me that film is not just a visual or narrative endeavor. It's a cultural event, shaped by anticipation, interpretation, and engagement with an audience hungry for both wonder and insight. Even the smaller departments, makeup, set decoration, catering, transportation, contributed in meaningful ways. I loved reading anecdotes about how the crew went to extreme lengths to ensure comfort and continuity, sometimes creating improvised solutions that became permanent parts of the film. The human stories behind these logistics are as compelling as the mythology on screen, a reminder that every cinematic universe is built on dedication, collaboration, and creativity on countless fronts. There is a particular magic in how a film's setting can transport us, not just in space, but in time, emotion, and imagination. From the moment the opening frames flicker across the screen, I am often drawn less to the dialogue or the action, and more to the world itself. That carefully constructed tapestry that seems alive and breathing, where every shadow, every architectural line, every sweep of landscape tells a story. In this particular tale, the settings are nothing short of monumental. They do not merely provide a backdrop for events, but actively participate in the narrative, influencing tone, character, and theme. The sheer ambition of the locations and visual design feels almost like a character unto itself, one with moods, intentions, and temperament that shape the unfolding drama. The opening sequences, as I recall them, immediately establish a tone that is both mythic and intimate. There is a delicate interplay between the vastness of the environment and the human figures navigating it. In one particular scene, the hero is introduced against a horizon that stretches endlessly, mountains silhouetted in a hazy light. The cinematography frames him small against this immense canvas, and yet, paradoxically, the camera imbues him with a sense of importance, foreshadowing his central role in the narrative. It's a subtle dance. Scale, light, and perspective work together to evoke a feeling of awe and anticipation. I found myself thinking about how often our lives are lived in such duality, insignificant in the grand scheme, yet profoundly consequential in the moments that demand courage and choice. As the story moves to urban and architectural settings, there is a deliberate contrast between human constructions and the untamed natural world. Palaces, temples, and arenas are crafted not just for spectacle, but for narrative resonance. The stone walls, towering columns, and intricate carvings convey a civilization that is both sophisticated and deeply hierarchical. Walking through these spaces, even vicariously through the lens of the camera, one senses the weight of tradition, power, and ritual. I imagine the art directors and set designers poring over historical texts, archaeological findings, and artistic interpretations, striving to strike a balance between historical plausibility and cinematic grandeur. The result is a world that feels lived in, authentic, and simultaneously larger than life. Nature, however, is where the film's cinematic elements truly shine. Vast deserts, jagged cliffs, storm-swept seas, and shadowed forests all serve as extensions of the narrative, echoing the emotional states of the characters and the stakes of their quests. I was fascinated by how light and atmosphere are used to sculpt these landscapes, transforming ordinary locations into realms that feel imbued with mythic significance. In one particularly vivid sequence, sunlight breaks through storm clouds,